All right, so there's also a spectrum of funding vehicles. We're going to start with gifts and then talk about loans and then equity and then bonds. So gifts don't require financial return. They're money that can be given usually to a nonprofit, but it can also be to a for-profit. They can be given by individuals or by organizations, and they can be given in small amounts or in large amounts. Now, donations are one type of gift that's given to a nonprofit, and it's tax deductible in most countries. And they can be either one time or repeating. So you've probably donated to one endeavor or another in your lifetime. And these usually donations are kind of a less hands-off way of supporting an endeavor. So, the entrepreneur won't necessarily report back to each donor. They'll report back on their social impact in general, but not for each gift or donation unless it's a large one. Grants, however, are a type of gift that can be more hands-on. Grants are usually in larger amounts, and they're usually for something specific, and they require reporting on how it's spent. So people spend a lot of time applying for grants, and this is a frustration of social entrepreneurs. They feel like they spend half the time responding to requests for proposals or looking up sources of funding, and then they have to provide a pitch for each one and a budget line for each one, so it's really time-consuming. It's usually given by an institution, not an individual, and there's an application process. So there are pros and cons of grants. They allow you to do your work without any financial liability, but it's time-consuming and usually restricted in some way, requires a lot of reporting. And then lastly, in terms of gifts, awards are a type of gift that are kind of in between donations and grants. So like donations, there's fewer restrictions and commitments. It's just given to you. And then like grants, there's a structured process. So, you could get an award in a startup competition, for example, or you could get it for achievement later in the process when you've reached your goals. Okay, so these are gifts. Next comes loans. Loans are a sum of money given to an individual or an institution that must be returned. So here you have financial liability. There's usually interest to adjust to be like greater than inflation because usually the institution or the person giving you the loan wants their money back and then some. But some individuals and institutions supporting social entrepreneurs and change makers may give low-interest loans or no-interest loans because they really just want to help. So pros and cons of loans, some entrepreneurs feel that it gives you more freedom than grants and equity because no one's in your way. Like as long as they get their money back, you have the freedom to operate and make decisions as you wish. But then the con is that whether you succeed or not, you have to give back that money, so you're liable for it. So a lot of social entrepreneurs have a fear of loans. And then equity is money given to you by a funder where they own part of your venture. This is usually used by venture capitalists, by private equity firms, or even by angel investors and friends and family. So here's what happens. First, you valuate the venture. Valuation means an estimate of the financial value of the proposition you're offering. Now, this takes place according to projected future revenues. So, for example, if you estimate that your venture is worth $1 million, and then you raise $10,000 from a family member to help demonstrate proof of concept. That person owns 10,000 divided by a million, which is 1%. I hope I'm doing the math right. So next, a term sheet is created, and it describes the agreement. It's like a grant agreement or a loan agreement. It specifies how long the equity is held. Like, for example, you hold on to this investment for 3 to 5 years while you're growing, and then the funder can choose to either hold their share, and in that case, they benefit from your profits that are distributed as dividends, or they can sell their share. They might sell it back to the entrepreneur, in which case the entrepreneur is going to spend more than the initial $10,000 because now it's worth more, or they might sell it to someone else, depending on the terms. So pros and cons of equity investing is that You don't have to give it back. If you fail, they fail. If you win, they win, and it's a win-win. Some entrepreneurs feel that the cons are that you lose decision-making power. When you take investment from someone in the form of equity, whether you're nonprofit or for-profit, also this happens when you take grants usually, they start kind of like wanting to be part of the decision-making process. So VC funders will push for growth, for example. They'll push you to scale fast. And sometimes in social entrepreneurship, that's not the goal. Sometimes it's scaling deep, right? So it's important to be careful in any source of funding when assessing the funder, making sure that values align again, and shopping around. You have negotiating power. Talk to others who have been supported by these funders and see what their experience has been. And lastly, bonds. So there's something called social impact bonds, which is pretty cool. The abbreviation is SIBs, and they fund large-scale endeavors. So basically, SIBs pay back the entrepreneur for the social outcomes that they create. So these could include health outcomes, employment outcomes, education outcomes. SIBs can be created by governments, foundations, or others. And the unique thing about SIBs is that there has to be proof. You have to have already collected some kind of evidence that what you're doing will create those outcomes. For example, you may have to do a randomized controlled trial, which is one form of research we talked about way back when in the research module. So this is for a more advanced endeavor. And it usually has multiple players involved, which I think is really cool. Like the government might not have the money to invest in this social outcome up front. So they get someone in the private sector to front the money to pay for the work. And then once those outcomes start coming in, once the government starts seeing the benefit of the social entrepreneur's work, then they pay back the private sector funder and the entrepreneur. So it's like a pay-for-performance mechanism. And those are the main financial vehicles. So now you've had a social financing 101 crash course. You have an idea of the sources of funding, the different ways they can fund you, the pros and cons, the different financial vehicles. So now we can get really juicy, because with this background info, you can join me in a more interesting conversation, or at least what I think is more interesting, in the next video. We're going to talk about the evolution of social financing approaches over time and what the latest trends are.